Well, welcome. We're here today on the Bar S Ranch to have our virtual presentation of our two honored rangemen, this being the 89th Old Time Rangeman. The Old Time Rangeman dinner was started by the CPR over 90 years ago to recognize the early rangemen. It was always held during Calgary Stampede, and over the years, this event grew to where the CPR decided that they had to end that event. A group of ranchers and businessmen took the event over, and since 1994, they've honored rangemen at the annual event. Well, it sure is different anyway. You all know we had to cancel 2020, but we were determined to have 2021 celebration if it does not include a dinner. So here we are, and let's get started. So I guess please stand for O Canada. Another tradition is our toast to the Queen. I hope that you all have a refreshment, and please, to the Queen.
To the Queen.
Another tradition is always honoring mentioning some of the rangemen that have passed on. Not having a meeting for a while, I'm sure we're going to be missing some. We could even dub them in if we learn of it afterwards. And there might be some background music. Delbert Gillespie, he was an honored rangeman in 2006. Pat Collins, he was an honored rangeman in 2018. Bill Copperthorne, David Dover, Gary Lawrence. And that's all I have on that list. The dinner committee is myself, John Douglas, Robin Arthur, John Sibbald, David Sibbald, Jason Edworthy, and Phil Rowland. Jason, of course, is the driving force putting all this virtual event together and all the other work when we have a real one at the Palliser. Of course, there's no name tags this year, but we hope you're all out there watching, and I'm guessing that you're watching with your significant other, the other rancher in the family. And here is Maureen with a message to the range gals.
Hi everyone, I'm maureen.schnirer, and I've been the chairperson of the Range Gals Dinner for over 20 years. And in that time, we have made a lot of very special memories. We've supported one another, and we've had a lot of laughs. This year looks a little different, but I know that in 2022, we're going to start off the night with those amazing deviled eggs, and we're going to have a great visit and see each other's faces. And at the end, we'll finish with that spectacular chocolate fountain and be hosted by the wonderful Palliser Hotel staff. So I look forward to seeing you in 2022, and in the meantime, let's pray for some rain.
Welcome back. I'm Jason Edworthy. I think this is my 11th year trying to run this thing, and of course, this is a big challenge, and I gotta say, COVID just sucks. There's no dinner, there's no watering hole, there's no lies, no tall tales, no visiting, but we're here, and you're here, and we're determined to keep this thing up and running. You may be looking to your left or your right, and you might see your significant other beside you. Welcome. It's great to have the Range Gals with us tonight. Now, some same old housekeeping that I always talk about. If you move, if your kids put you in a home, or if you leave us and decide to go to those greener pastures up there, let us know. That way we can hopefully get the mail to you or the email for next year, or we can take you off the list and Roy can mention your name. Another housekeeping item I could use some help with is back when we used only Canada Post, we always got a number of invites back with incorrect addresses, again, because people had moved or something. So if you have moved, please look at the mailing address below this video and let me know. Even better is if you've now got an email due to the pandemic, look below, get the email address, and send me your new email so that we can start doing all this electronically. That would be a big help. You know, we held this dinner to only $80 for a number of years, and when we come back next year holding it at the Palliser, we fully expect the price to go up. Not sure what it'll be, but I just wanted to give you a heads up about that. The folks there have been very understanding and accommodating, and we do have next year's date already booked for 2022.
So, for our first award, I get to introduce our first rangeman. Just being honored, and that's Clay Chataway. Now, Clay has, I'm going to call him, besides being introduced as one of our honored rangemen, he's a historian, and he's going to be a lot of our entertainment today because he's got so much stuff. He's done 2 books, and he's just a wealth of rancher entertainment and knowledge. So, of course, Clay is here on this beautiful Bar S ranch with his family, and all the boys are out doing work that has to be done, I guess. So, with any further ado, I'll switch this over to Clay.
Well, the first thing I'd like to do is take you back a number of years when Grant McEwen was a speaker at the Rangeman's Dinner, and I can't tell you what year it was, but it's getting to be a long time ago now. So he's talking about old-time rangemen, and of course my grandpa came up. So he says, one time Rod McClay went to Montreal to talk to the head banker. And he walked in, and the secretary said, "What can I do for you?" He said, "I'd like to see the manager." And she said, "Well, I'm sorry, Mr. McClay, but the manager's too busy." To which Grant McEwen said, "My grandfather said, I owe the son of a gun $300,000 and he'll see me right now." And the next one, most of you will remember Eric Butters, who gave a talk, and he left something out that I thought you should know about. So I phoned Eric up and I said, you left this bit about Eb Johnson out. And I didn't ask him why, because I know Eric's just too modest to bring it up. And so with his permission, I'll tell you the rest of the story. So Eb Johnson was working on a ranch in Wyoming, and a fellow by the name of Owen Wister knew the rancher. And he asked the rancher if he could come learn as much as he could about cowboys and ranches, because he was going to write a book. Well, the book he wrote was called The Virginian, and that's where Eb Johnson came from. It happened that the rancher assigned Eb Johnson to so-called babysit this Owen Wister, and it annoyed It annoyed Eb Johnson to no end, but it sure pleased Owen Wister because he used Eb as a model for the Virginian. That's the rest of the story. So with that, I'll start about my grandfather, our grandfather, Mac and my grandfather, Rod Maclay. He came from Danville in the eastern townships of Quebec. Many of the men with feet on the ground in southwestern Alberta had roots in the eastern townships. There were several, but an example is former Northwest Mounted Policeman William Winder, who planted the seed of leasing land at a cent an acre in the head of his brother-in-law, Fred Stimson. Stimson took the idea to the Allen family of shipping fame in Montreal, and the Northwest Cattle Company, or Bar U, was born in 1882. The Bar U comes up later in the Maclay story. Although Maclays were not part of all that, they were obviously aware of it, and Rod was tempted away from a life in a mercantile store with a father, brothers, uncles, cousins, all breathing down his neck while stocking shelves. Rod had no old money, limited livestock experience, and no hope in the townships. Curiously, he also had a doctor's recommendation to find a drier climate. We don't know exactly what his problem was. We suspect it was epilepsy, but he had fainting spells. They were severe enough that he refused to drive a car all his life. They were well aware of the Highwood area from several families that had moved from Danville to take up homesteads along the Highwood. In fact, Rod's uncle Joseph Riddle was in partnership with his brother-in-law Dave Thorburn, who had settled where the Highwood runs into the Bow River in an area called Davisburg. They had a lot of acquaintances, all in the same area. Then George Emerson, the father of all cattlemen, showed up in Danville after being away for 40-odd years. And he explained where a venture, such as Rod was dreaming about, could happen. Our parents gave George credit for his influence on our grandfather and the choices he made. Rod Maclay's mother was a Riddle, so the Maclays and the Riddles combined their resources to back their sons moving west. In the fall of 1900, his cousin Douglas Riddle and a friend Marvin Morrill visited Emerson on Pekisko Creek. They explored the area and visited all their Danville friends. And to be true to his doctor, Rod even went so far as to check out the dry sandhills in Saskatchewan. Homesteading was the cheapest way to start a land base. And they chose an area that Emerson had suggested and filed for homesteads, all on the same section. At the time, there were very few homesteads in the hills, as there was a lot better land available on the flats. They returned to Danville and formed a partnership. Rod, his brother Alex, Douglas Riddle, and Marvin Morrill. The coffers of the two families were exhausted, setting them up to move west. After that, they were to be on their own. In May of '01, they left Danville with 12 railway cars. They took as much as they could to avoid frontier prices. Hay machinery, tools, pre-cut lumber for a house, all household effects, 289 head of cattle, and 6 horses. They bought the section next to their homestead section, so that all improvements were on land that was owned in common. By the end of the year, they had completed the essentials. In less than a year, Morrill left the partnership, and the operation became known as Riddle and Maclay Brothers. In '02, like so many other ranchers, they went into the horse business. Rod went to Oregon and brought back several carloads of heavy horses. Settlement required horses, and lots of them, so the market was local. It was a no-brainer. By the end of '03, they had accumulated 4 sections of grass and sold their first cattle. They were replaced with the first cows branded a Round Top TO and came from where Western Feedlots is located today. This meant he needed bulls, so he went to his first Calgary bull sale in '04 and attended his first stock growers convention at the same time. By '05, their land base was 8.5 sections, but opportunities in the hill were few and far between and getting expensive. Knowing land could be leased from the CPR, he made a deal in July '05 to lease a township and a half along the Red Deer River. This sudden expansion was 100 miles from home and needed a base for operations. He learned that John Ware was willing to sell, but before a deal was made, Ware was killed. Coincidentally, Ware's wife Mildred had died earlier that same year, so the Royal Trust took over for the 5 children. Riddle and Maclay paid $1,600 deposit and then $12,500 on October 31st for all livestock equipment, buildings, and 5 brands, of which the 3 walking sticks would become the most significant. They were all set to stock it the following summer, '06. After getting it all set up, Rod went to Danville for a visit. He came back with a wife in January '06. This changed the family dynamics in what so far had been a bachelor household. With dry stock from the home place and some locally bought steers, they trailed their first 500 head to the walking sticks. Then he went to Manitoba for more stockers, bringing the herd to about 1,500. Summer went well, but then you all know what happened. A winter from hell. A letter I have says Riddle and Maclay found only 250 of the 1,500 head. The next surprising thing they did was to be among the first to ship to Chicago, despite the 27% tariff. I guess after the loss they'd suffered, 27 didn't seem that bad. These cattle would most likely have been from the home place and not the walking sticks, because they were still too young. It was about this time the need for credit started to expand. The partnership of Riddle and Maclay brothers was coming apart by the seams in late '08. Alex wanted to return east and marry, and Douglas had an attractive offer to manage a neighboring ranch. The end result was that Emerson partnered with Rod Maclay, and they bought out Douglas and Alex. The outfit then became Emerson and Maclay and used George's brand, the Rockin' P. It was a 50-50 arrangement, but George let Rod run the show. In '09, Dorothy was born, and in '11, Maxine arrived. Laura looked after the girls and the payroll, which kept increasing. She also looked after the groceries and filled in between cooks as they came and went. One month she saw 5 different turnovers before a good one finally showed up. Rod made 2 more trips to Oregon, 1910 and Rod made 2 more trips to Oregon to buy horses. In 1910, he brought back 101 at $90 a head, counting duty, and in 11 he acquired 87 at about the same price. That fall, he sold 3 for $190 a head. Cattle prices were improving too, up 20% from the beginning of the partnership. And about this time, he also started buying out homesteaders, Hudson's Bay land, C&E land, and land he held under lease, especially if it could be homesteaded. Mind you, all this was done on time, payments, and the bank was certainly involved, or the various outfits were taking the mortgage. Then in 1914, George decided to turn the partnership over to Rod. George's share came to $80,000, and he agreed to installments. Rod borrowed $227,000 at 8%, gave George $5,000 to cement the deal, and he spent the rest on cattle and on operating expenses. Nevertheless, he had George paid off in 5 years with a final payment in 1919. With the first installment, Rod took all his carefully prepared documents of the last 6 years to George. George gathered them all up, receipts, bills, the whole works, walked over to the stove and stuffed them in, saying, "If you're happy, Rod, so am I." Then along came another land deal in 1916 when Dan Riley offered him the TL on what is now called Westrip Creek. Off to the bank again. Banks willingly loaned on liquid assets such as cattle, but not on land. The seller invariably took a mortgage, and in this case 6% to be paid off in 3 years, which it actually was. Times were pretty good. A break came in 1918 when he got a forestry permit just west of the TL that equated to a 10,000 acre expansion, or what it actually was 1,000 head for 5 months for $350. At this point, he controlled 110 sections of land and had 4,500 head of cattle. Settlement was so extensive by 18 they could no longer trail cross-country to the Red Deer. Fortunately, the Royal Railway line had been built, so they were able to ship by rail from Cayley to Dutchess, 6 miles from the Ware place. Just when he should have stepped on the brake, he stepped on the gas, and in 1919 he bought the Bar S from Pat Burns, lock, stock, and barrel. He knew if he didn't, the opportunity may never happen again. The land was mostly deeded, making it expensive, and cattle had jumped from $55 in 1916 to $90 in 1919. Burns sweetened the pot by adding 2,280 steers, liquid assets, on the Red Deer branded Circle 3. The total deal was $532,565. Rod got the money for the cattle from the bank, and Burns took a mortgage on the land for $224,000. There were other cattle included, other than the where'd it go? The Bar S went smoothly, but when it came to the cattle on the Red Deer, Burns claimed there were other cattle included other than the steers on the Circle Range. Rod refused them. The lawyers got involved and they went to court. Rod lost, and his lawyer, R.B. Bennett, who was to become Prime Minister, appealed to the highest court in Alberta, where they lost again. Convinced the establishment was working them over, they appealed to the highest court available. Bypassing the Supreme Court of Canada, they were granted permission to go directly to the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council of England. Burns capitulated, but now Rod had time payments to Bennett, but far less than if he had lost to Burns. Things really took a downturn in the 20s. By July 21, cattle could hardly maintain half their wartime value. Winters were tough and feed was expensive. The 1920s actually took a heavier toll on cattlemen than did the hard winter of 06 and 07. It is now considered the forgotten depression. Finally, Laura talked Rod into getting some medical attention, so he went to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, New York. They took tests and x-rays, but they had no answer for his fainting spells and advised him to be careful, and it cost him $50. The forestry permit was doubled to include the northwest branch of the Old Man River in 1921, and as luck would have it, a quarter had been homesteaded on the west side of the Livingston River. Rod was able to buy it as a base for operations, and which now allowed 2,000 head. This was probably the most expensive quarter he ever bought, but he recognized the inherent value of this extraordinary quarter, and coincidentally it is now next to one of the proposed coal mines. The collapse in cattle prices made the banks nervous. He managed to sell the Circle steers for a small profit before the real crash came, but the math justifying the Bar S was now clearly offside. The bank knew Burns held the mortgage, and the amount Rod owed them wasn't getting any smaller, so they started putting pressure on. Burns, too, was getting anxious because payments had been nil. Then Billy Fairs from the same Billy Fairs as in the Gordon Ironsides and Fairs Company put Rod onto a deal that could help. It involved the Mule Creek Cattle Company on the White Mud River, now called the Frenchman, in southwestern Saskatchewan. Rod managed to convince Burns that if he would back him, the mortgage could be dissolved. They were asking $40,000 for 72,000 acres of lease and 1,100 head of cattle. They proceeded with a leap of faith from both. With Burns as a silent partner, Rod bought the Mule Creek Cattle Company on 9th of August 24. They called it the 76 because it had once been part of that massive outfit. It was understocked, and the plan was to move cattle from the hills and load it up. If cattle prices improved and the price of land went up, it would work. It was about this time he started putting assets in his wife Laura's name. In fact, the walking sticks was hers, land and cattle, as was the Circle brand and the 76 in Saskatchewan. The cattle that went to the 76 were technically Laura's, branded with the Circle, and on the Red Deer they were branded with the 3 walking sticks. The idea was not to have all his assets in one basket in case the bank foreclosed. In 1928, they had 2,600 head on the White Mud River, and the price had just about doubled. The lease had been renewed for 21 years, and the area declared unfit for settlement by making the lease a much higher value than 4 years previous. They added to the land base, bringing the total acres to 97,825 acres. Laura borrowed the money to repay Burns for the backing, the 40,000, and they approached him with an offer to sell it. They settled on a price of $231,000. The proceeds cleared them of the Bar S mortgage. The bank was repaid for the recent loan, and they put $10,700 in their own account. During the time they owned the 76, Rod was considered the largest individual landowner in Canada. I've got a copy from the High River Times that described him as that in 1925. In 1928, he controlled over 290 sections, or 186,000 acres. The two girls were largely homeschooled in the early years. During this time, they produced a remarkable record of ranch life. They created a thing called the Rocking Pea Gazette, which was a single monthly handwritten magazine. It was full of ranch goings-ons and fully illustrated. It can be found by just simply Googling Rocking Pea Gazette. That's handled by the Glenbow Museum, and the originals of the Rocking Pea Gazettes are also in the Glenbow Museum. They spent their latter years of school at St. Hilda's in Calgary and 2 years, and a year or two in Berkeley, California. In 1929, they both started at the U of A together. After 2 years in residence, Rod's checks started bouncing. So they didn't know where they could stay, and they were invited to live with the Dean of Agriculture, E.I. House, the E.I. House family. Dorothy majored in history and literature and graduated in 32. Maxine did a year of arts and then switched to agriculture and became the first woman to graduate with a BSc in agriculture. In 1930, they restructured by incorporating as Maclay Ranches, but Rod would not put all his land into the corporation. Banks recognized a brand as ownership, so most brands were rolled into the company, but not the 3 walking sticks or any holdings on the Red Deer. In the 30s, so many were in trouble with the bank that the bank came up with a scheme called a compromised loan. In Maclay's case, they took the loan, which was now $317,000. They wrote off $20,000, and the remaining $297,000 had a fixed rate of 2% for 10 years. Any further borrowings would be at the usual rate of 5 to 7%. If the loan was outstanding after 10 years, it would revert to the original terms plus original interest. So that meant set a deadline for 1942. It would have been a horrific amount of money. I haven't done the math to see what it would have come to. Then along came the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act that raised the tariff from 20 to 30% and cattle prices crashed. Prices fell from $76 a head to $52 that fall thanks to the tariff. The bank put more pressure on and then essentially froze the entire business. They bounced checks to contractors, halted automatic payments to the Hudson's Bay and C&E for land payments, and of course there was even the U of A checks that bounced. Rod went to see the head bankers in Montreal, but to no avail. That may have been the one Grant McEwen was talking about. Eventually he had to put more land in the company in order to loosen the strings. He became involved in cowboy politics about 1920 when the Stock Growers Protective Association was actively trying to rid the country of mange. That group joined with the Western Stock Growers, and he was chairman of the marketing committee when the tariff hit. The federal government created a thing called the Council of Western Beef Producers to revive the UK trade. The council was essentially the stock growers' marketing committee, and Rod became the chairman of the council. This was at the national level and more or less a forerunner of the Canadian Cattlemen's Association. The last major addition to the home place occurred in 1929. There were 3 1/4 sections that jutted into their holdings a mile from the buildings. and always had from the very beginning. The cost was $31,200, and again the seller, which was the Herbigs, took a mortgage for all but $200. The 1930s were tough years for many. The walking sticks was run the old-fashioned way. Cheap. The grass was cheap, wages for 5 men tops, and maybe some seasonal help, no farming or haying, and interest on cattle loans may have been the biggest cost. So they decided to expand the walking sticks, and in 31, they bought 10,500 acres of lease from George Bates on Spring Creek for $2,000. My guess is that some of that land donated to the UA by the Mattheses would have been some of the Bates lease at one time. Mike Staples was leased in 1934, and the old chuck wagon was put back into service to trail 600 3-year-old steers over 5 days to Buffalo. Then in 1936, he acquired title to 2,845 acres in the EID. I speculate this land was already being leased, and the motive was security. They ran the whole herd, 1,200 head, further west in Crawling Valley from 39 to 42, which was more work for the chuck wagon. I have no details on Crawling Valley, nor do I have details when he ran cattle north of the river, but this may have been for winter feed on straw piles. In 1938, the bank really went after him with a quitclaim, which means they can legally force you to throw in the towel. Lawyers and accountants got involved. Not a dent had been made in the compromised loan since its inception. However, he had repaid $200,000 of operating advances over 8 years of the worst depression in history, but that didn't count. He was desperate for money. Of the payments he made over the 30s, most were more than what McClay Ranch sales amounted to, and I conclude that the money came from the 3 walking sticks. The situation came to a head in 1941 as the bank registered a statement of claim with the Supreme Court of Alberta. They ruled in favor of the bank and pegged the debt at $389,000. Fortunately, from the beginning of the war, cattle prices had started to increase steadily over the next decade, from $65 a head in 39 to $130 a head by 1945. They were able to make a payment of $54,000 from cattle sales, and it is the first payment on McClay Ranch books since 1930. Rod hired a lawyer who was able to come up with a deal whereby if they were paid cold hard cash, no mortgage, they could settle for $225,000. Even at a loss, the bank wanted out. Now there's a guy called Carl Christensen who made a living out of financing farmers and ranchers, and he had taken over the Herbig mortgage in 1939. They had decided to sell the walking sticks for a number of reasons, but the deal was still pending. Carl loaned them $190,000 to bridge the gap until the walking sticks was sold, and they scratched up the balance and walked. The first payment to the bank was to be $200,000 and $25,000 later that year. Rod walked into the Bank of Montreal, handed them their $200,000, walked across the street, and opened an account at the Royal Bank. Rod was in line to be the president of the Western Stock Growers in 1942, but as well as selling the walking sticks, he wanted to settle down and declined being president. By fall, it was public knowledge that Rod was dealing with the past president of the stock growers, George Stringham. In the end, they settled on $150,000 for the walking sticks, lock, stock, and barrel. By this time, there was 65,425 acres, and fully a third of it was deeded land. From the proceeds, some loans had been outstanding for years to family members that were cleared off. The bank got their final $25,000. Carl got a chunk. The books then showed that McClay Ranches owed Laura, i.e. Carl, $96,890. 890. 96,890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. 890. In 43, Rod was instrumental in convincing the government that the Pekisco group of Stonies should have their own reserve. Finally, the government was able to buy a small ranch from Garner, and Eden Valley Sub-Reserve was set up in 1948. At a ceremony in 1950, the Stoney made Rod an honorary member of the tribe in appreciation and gave him the name Mapayato, meaning blue sky. Subsequently, a recreation center was built and named the Rod McClay Arena. Carl Christensen was paid off ahead of schedule in 1947, due largely to rising cattle prices. The big day had finally come. They were out of debt. At least it seemed like it should be a big day. However, it came and went with little fanfare. There was no celebration, no mortgage-burning ceremony, no champagne. Life just went on. It was anticlimactic for a drama made up of 2 world wars, 2 depressions, drought, lawyers, bankers, accountants, lawsuits, bouncing checks, train trips back and forth across the continent, and 2 of the worst killing winters in ranching history. Over the 1940s, both daughters were married, Dorothy to Ernie Blades and Maxine to George Chataway. Rod and Laura reveled in the arrival of 5 Blades grandkids and 2 Chataway grandkids. Both Ernie and George worked for the outfit. Although they had a cook and a housekeeper, the 1901 house lacked many things. They started spending the cold, dark winter days in Calgary, where they had a warm bed. Laura's sister was married to Rod's cousin, Stuart Riddle, who had worked for him as a right-hand man since 1919 on into the late 40s when he retired. Stuart and Gertrude, Laura's sister, moved to the Rideau Towers. Then if Rod and Laura could rent an apartment in the Rideau Towers, they would stay there. If not, they'd stay at the Palliser. The last cattle McClay ranches shipped out of Calgary was in 1948. Rod and Stuart helped trail 473 3-year-old steers weighing 1,169 pounds and brought $226 a head. Trucks were used after that. The Alberta History sign on Highway 2A at Cayley features a picture of the trail drive. In the late 40s, 2 satellite operations appear. Ernie Blades had bought the Dew Place in 1941, and he and Dorothy lived there raising their 5 kids. Maxine and Dorothy had bought the Comrie Place in 46, and in 49, George bought Dorothy's share. They built a house in 1950, and each outfit ran an appropriate number of cattle of their own, but their main job was still with McClay Ranches. In 1950, the Bar-U came up for sale. The board of directors had been soliciting bids, and with no luck as a going concern, they decided to parcel it off section by section by sealed bids. The Blades and Chataway families took advantage, but Rod was done. He said the upset price was ridiculous. In 1952, Laura passed away from diabetic complications. In October 53, Dorothy took her dad to the hospital because he wasn't feeling well. All the way he was giving her orders to pass on to the crew. He died that evening. Maxine and Dorothy divided McClay Ranches according to his wishes between the Blades and Chataway families. At this point in time, over 72 people can claim to be descendants of Rod and Laura McClay. That's that.
Clay and Averill.
Do this right.
Okay.
Thanks, Roy.
Yeah, let's
Thank
go to
you.
Colin.
Oh, that's really nice.
Still got the mic if you want to say anything else.
Well, I've got the Chataway end of the story to tell yet, don't I?
Okay.
Do you want to do that now while I got the mic on?
Sure.
Yeah, I'd like to thank the committee for nominating me to be one of the Rangemen of the Year. I consider it a great privilege and honor. Thank you very much. Well, as you must be well aware of now that Rod McClay's estate became the Rocking P in Bar S. Dorothy and Maxine decided to use the road as a dividing line. The Chattaways had the former Comrie place where they built a house, relocated Comrie's barn, and set up a small set of corrals on the northeast of 216-2 west of the 5th in 1950. The same year, George bought 5 sections of lease from the Bar U at the upset price. This land was detached from the rest of their holdings, and it was notorious for poison, and still are. Rod got the Bar S brand in 1919, but he never used it. It was a natural that they used the Bar S brand, and the name of the ranch, the Bar S, was a natural as well. They incorporated as such in 1954. The Bar S buildings were about 3 miles east of the Comrie place, where the crew, machinery, blacksmith shop, cookhouse, and a large set of corrals were in place. The first thing George and Maxine did was seed 1,000 acres of farmland down to grass, or rather hay. The land inherited connected all the holdings into one congruous block, except for 3 sections of 7U Brown's land that jutted in from the west. Things quietly ticked along as they homeschooled their 2 kids, Clay and Carol, for a couple of years, and about 54 a schoolhouse was set up at a central location that was donated by the Blades. I don't remember if it fell down, blew down, or was tore down, but a proper school was set up and was moved into place, and that is the one you drive by a few miles east of here. All the kids in the area attended, grades 1 to 9, all in one room with one teacher. In '59 it was closed down and the kids were bused to Nanton. Mom and Dad gave my sister and I the choice of riding the bus or going away to private school. My sister picked the bus and I picked boarding school. In '62, Dad was the icebreaker for kick-starting the Waldron Grazing Co-op by buying the maximum number of shares, 25, for $1,000 each. That gave them the cash they needed to proceed. Ed Nelson gives Dad great credit in his book about the Waldron. It was the first ranch in Alberta to sell for $1 million. His motive was that someday the mistake he made by not buying into Spruce Grazing Co-op, who bought the 7U, could be rectified. Dad misjudged the 7U Brown sale a few years previous, and the 3 sections jutting into the ranch became Spruce Grazing. He and I did manage to trade the use of some Waldron and Spruce shares with Burke Creek Ranch, which simplified both our operations because of location. Then, last year, his dream came true when we managed to trade the use of our remaining Waldron shares with the ranch that was running on these 3 7U sections. No cattle were sent to the Waldron for the first time in 58 years. In the early years, we sold 2-year-old steers and calved 3-year-old heifers. In the mid-60s, we started brush clearing and chemical weed control. That was a simple process to get approval on lease at the time, but it was decided to spend our capital was best spent on deeded land. Over the years, we cleared as much as was practical and a small amount on lease. It would be difficult to get permission to do so on lease anymore. In '67, we bought a place on Wildcat Creek near where the Willow Valley Road heads west from Highway 22. My sister had married and she was set up, but unfortunately the marriage failed and we ran steers there for a couple of years until we sold it for Carol in 1969 to Brian Coughlin. This essentially removed her from the company. By the way, we got 18 inches of rain that June. We bought shares in Western Feedlots when it was inaugurated and custom fed for many years until we switched to selling yearlings in the fall of '85. Thanks to genetics and more sophisticated grazing, our steers weigh about 200 pounds more than the entry weight that we used to have going into Western Feedlot. In general, we always did all right, but margins got too thin, so we sold the Western shares to buy more Waldron shares. I remember measuring loose haystacks with Dad, but we switched to little round bales. We contracted out a lot, but we did some ourselves. Contracting got expensive, so we started doing it all. In '73, we went to little square bales and contracted the baling out, but we cut and stacked with a stack wagon. In '76, Dad bought 2 of the first 6 New Holland balers to come into Canada. In 2014, we started wrapping bales and reduced our feed need by using a feedlot to background calves. In '83, Dad and I bought land in the Spring Point area west of the Buffalo Jump. We ran about 400 odd steers there until we set up a scale and started playing around. The Spring Point steers weighed the least of 3 locations, so we switched to pairs in 2001. In 1980, we started phasing out Herefords and phasing in Beef Booster M1 and M4 bulls. And by 1995, all we had was Beef Booster bulls. In 1983, we bred our first yearling heifers to Beef Booster M3s. From basically a Hereford herd in 1954 to what looks like a red and black Angus herd today, but we still have to dehorn too damn many calves. Our average calving date used to be mid-April, now it's mid-May. In '87, we traded the deeded land at Spring Point for lease land on the home place. It was not 1 for 1 because of different values, but we felt it improved our security on the home place. In 1987, we began custom grazing sheep on the premise that we could improve the range condition. We hired a herder and ran 1,200 ewes and their lambs, making the flock about 2,500. There was about half a dozen people that contributed to the flock. The night pens had the most lasting effect, and I can still see where those night pens were even today. We never made any money at it, but we never lost any either. By '93, we tired of it and just quit. That year, the Timothy was so high that it wore the hair off the sheep herder's horse's legs. In '97, we went ranching in Montana. We partnered with the Lowe brothers, Don and Bob, to run 1,200 to 1,600 head in 2 locations. 4 sections are deeded on the border where the Milk River runs into Canada, and 8 sections of lease from an Indian north of Duck Lake. We could trail steers from the deeded to the lease in a long day. The lease was almost solid bush, but the steers did well and losses were very low. There was a bad snowstorm in late June '02. Avril and I flew down to have a look and saw very few cattle because of the brush, and in most places all you could see was the top wire of the fences. The cattle didn't weigh well that fall, but the losses were not an issue. When BSE hit, we had about half the herd down there and the other half were turned around at the border. That put an end to the venture and we sold out in 2005. The 54,000 acre Grantham fire started December 14th, '97. Our Spring Point place was the first it consumed. The fences were gone. We hired a gang of Kiwis to totally rebuild 15 miles. It was a good thing in that regard as it needed work anyway. We rested it the following summer. As it crossed us in the morning, it was not as hot as it was later on in the day. We suffered no soil damage and in fact cleaned up acres and acres of low bush juniper. We lost a set of corrals and a water trough that was full of water. Over the last 20 years, we've been using more and more electric fence. We used to have 2 fields with 4 sections in them. Now you're hard pressed to find a field with a section in it. That would not be feasible without electric fence. Probably more than half our fence is now electric, and we use portable to subdivide temporarily. That is not in that count. That really helps us get better use in areas that we have a poison issue. We started improving springs to go along with higher cattle densities using repurposed mine tires. There are over 40 to date, but in a year like this, some are not strong enough to matter, or even dry. We're also using more solar and siphon systems to improve quality and make water last longer. Free access just won't cut it in many cases. In 2015, we won the Alberta Beef Producers Environmental Stewardship Award for Alberta. And I'm lucky enough that all 3 of my sons have become involved in the ranch, and they pretty much run it today. The last few years, grandkids have taken over the need to hire outside help. I pretty much do as I'm told and try to keep abreast of what's going on. And every once in a while I have a good idea or 2. I was involved with Foothills Forage for several years and was chairman. Then I was involved with the Western Stock Growers for years. I can remember the first president I met at a convention was Gordon Burton. I should have looked up the year he was president, but that was a long time ago. And I never missed many conventions. And then in 86, 87, I was honored to be chairman of the Western Stock Growers. I guess they call him president, eh, Roy? I was honored to be president of the Western Stock Growers. Did Mac mention that he was honorary president? Anyway, Mac was honorary president for Phil Rowland. One of the great loves of my life was working with the Waldron Ranch Board. For 27 years I was on the Waldron Board, and 12 of those years I was president of the Waldron. I think they call that chairman. Anyway, oh, yeah, now I can read your lips now. And subsequently, about 3 years ago, my son Chris was nominated to the board of directors of the Waldron Ranch. Yeah, I was a zone delegate when the Alberta Cattle Commission was started up. I was a zone delegate for 2 terms, I think it was, and then I opted out. I didn't run for election the year I was president of the Western Stock Growers, and then I went back for another term on Alberta Cattle Commission. So I think that's about it.
Okay, now our next honored rangeman is Mac Blades, and he'll give us his history of the Rock-and-Pean family. And I know Mac had been involved in all aspects of the livestock industry, plus serving on council with Rangeland County or municipality, and for over 16 years, and most of that is the Reeve. So here's Mac Blades.
Well, thanks, Roy, and thanks to the committee for choosing me for this award. And I want to thank Clay also for all his work and research into our grandfather's history and writing the book. You did a fantastic job. Well, when Granddad passed, the ranch was split between the Bar S and the Rock-and-P, as Clay has already iterated. But it was split with Clay's family because the part of the Bar S went with the part that Maxine and George already had, and the Rock-and-P part on the north side of the road became my mom and dad's, and it went with their place where we grew up as kids. I remember spending some time with my grandpa when I was a little boy, but when Grandpa passed, both the ranches were split. Growing up with my family at home before the ranch split, we didn't have many close neighbors. Chattaways were our closest neighbors. So that's who we played with, my 3 sisters and brothers, and Clay and Carol. And Clay and I spent a lot of time together. And some of the things I remember when we were kids was we filled Uncle George's tractor up for him one day. But we soon learned after that tractors didn't run on water. So that was one of the things I remember. And one time Clay and I had a bunch of shotgun shells. They were already spent, so they fit on our fingers real well. And we decided we'd detonate a live one. So with these shells on our fingers to protect them, the other one took a nail and hit with a hammer and exploded the shell. Well, we didn't have any shotgun shells left on our fingers, and luckily we didn't lose any. And one time there was a log cabin on calf camp, it was called. We were playing in there like we were big people and we're living in this. So we started the old cook stove up and got it going. And well, then we decided we needed something to eat and there was nothing in there to cook. So we went out and it was springtime and there was a calf that had died at birth. So we got a little meat off him and took it back and fried it up. It really wasn't very tasty. It didn't poison us, so we got by that. And another time we were playing and we were in the attic, and we really weren't supposed to be in there, but standing on the beams we were okay, but Clay missed the beams and ended up in the office below. Well, growing up with all this, we went to school at home. I went to school at home for 3 years. And if the Indians were there working for Dad or something, all the kids would come and go to school with us. And so that was kind of the way we grew up, you know, working on the ranch and learning to love the environment and the landscape and everything. Then after that, we went to the Brayhead School, and you would have passed it on the way out here, that little old brown building. And we went there till grade 8, and then they bused us into Calgary. Well, at Brayhead, in Clay and I's class, there was him and I and another girl, neighbor girl, Myrna Smith. And that was our class. So anyway, then in 1996, our part of the Rock and Pea was split between my 3 sisters and brother and myself. I kept the Rock and Pea company and the Rock and Pea brand. And so we carried on from there. And Renee and I had 3 children. Our son Justin runs the cow operation now and does work with the range and the environment. My daughter married Blake Slusher. They have 2 children. Blake is an excellent horseman, so they run the horse program on the ranch. And their son Strand is now at home working full-time on the ranch, and he's become an excellent horseman. Their daughter just graduated from university. Our oldest daughter, Shauna, owns and operates Cowboy Country Clothing in Natin, and she married Maynard Bird, and he was from Arizona, and they still have a place down there that they spend quite a bit of the winter on. And Maynard also has a stock contracting business that he contracts all timed event cattle to most of the professional rodeos in Canada. Well, with all of this, with my love of the ranching industry and my love of the country and being there, I got involved with a lot of things. I was on the MD board for 16 years. First off, it was an ID6. I was an advisory council. And while we did that, we built an office building in the Chain Lakes Park. We built a shop along Highway 22. And we lobbied the government to become an MD. And we became MD of Ranchland number 66. So that was a big improvement because we could collect our own taxes and run the whole show pretty much. And so it was a great improvement, and it's still a great place to ranch and live in. We actually don't live in Ranchland anymore. We live in Willow Creek. I was a director on the stock growers. I have been a director on the Southern Alberta Land Trust for the last 20 years. The Land Trust instigated the Southern Alberta, the Southern Foothills Study. That is an environmental accumulative effects study. In many of the government people and different organizations use it for environmental purposes. And Salts has now roughly 6,000 acres under easements. We have a full slate of easements to come forward next year. In the next year after that, we have maybe a full slate of easements that we don't even know if we can handle. So people are really putting in good-sized easements in really environmentally sensitive areas. Then the Pisco group came along, and Phil here, he's been a member of Salts in the Pisco group, so he knows about it. But it was started in around 2000 we didn't like the way seismograph outfits coming through the country were tearing up the places and going in places they shouldn't. So that's how we got started. Then later on, we took Vermilion Resources to task. They were going to drill a sour gas well south of Longview on some pristine ranch area. They ended up not drilling that well or building their pipeline. Petro-Canada was going to build a pipeline from the Highwood River south through the headwaters of Willow Creek, over Johnson Creek, and into there was a gas plant at down on the Livingston River. We spent four months in hearings and got that stopped. In 2007 it was that the Pisco group got the Ranchman's of the Year award. And we also got an award from the Society of Range Management for Stewardship. Anyway, we've done a few other things, but our big deal now is the coal development in the eastern slopes. In Renee and I and John and Laura Lang ended up with a judicial review against the government for rescinding the coal policy without consultation. The government reinstated the coal policy. They didn't totally pay us for our lawyer fees, but anyway, they rescinded the coal policy and started this panel to do consultations with all the people of Alberta to see what they wanted. They first sent out a questionnaire to see what the people thought about the coal policy. So in all these questionnaires, the questions came back. They figured they'd get about 5,000 responses on that. They got 25,000. And the people all said, stop the exploration and no coal mining in the eastern slopes. So that gave them the authority to stop the coal exploration for this year. On June the 18th, the Grassy Mountain hearing was last fall, and the panel is supposed to make their decision on June the 18th whether it can go or not. We're hoping they put enough restrictions on them that they'll have to do a lot more than they've done up to this date to go. The government has given the coal policies just about a blank, go ahead and do whatever you want. There's not many environmental studies they have to do or anything. The one coal company that has mineral leases on Cabin Ridge right behind the quarter Clay was talking about that my granddad bought in 1921. That was 100 years ago. We were so it'll be virtually useless if they open pit coal mine there. So this is a big thing for us. You know, we run a lot of cattle up there and have for years, and it would definitely cramp our style if we couldn't do that. It would slow our operations down. So anyway, with all these things that I've done to try to help the environment and keep the ranch land and everything intact the way it is, and with our kids and grandkids coming in, I'm really happy that they enjoy the land and the country and the environment as much as I do. And I enjoy nothing more than riding with my grandkids and kids and moving cattle and everything in this wonderful, pristine landscape that we enjoy living in. Thanks to, again, to my grandfather and the rest of my family for everything that's gone. And thank the rangeman. I've really enjoyed over the years being at these rangemen's dinner and being on all these boards and everything. All the people that I've met, all the good people, makes it all worthwhile. All these things come together and make it worthwhile. Thanks again for the honor.
Sorry.
Thanks, Roy.
Thank you
Appreciate
for
that.
everything. And really,
Thank you.
I guess
Very
we're
nice.
starting a new tradition. Hey,
we'll find out where it goes from here.
Thanks again. I really appreciate that.
If you enjoyed this video, you can comment about it down below. If you want, you can share this video with others. And of course, you can watch it again and again if you want. If you know someone that would enjoy being a part of this great historic organization, whether it's the Rangemen or the Range Gals, look down below for info on how to reach us or Maureen and get on the list for that.
Hi, I'm maureen.schnirer, and I have Grace here, my horse. I've been to 5 Range Gals dinners, and my mom has been the chairperson, but I am her daughter, so I'm the coordinator, kind of. So I love when we laugh and talk and make new friends. So I'm glad that we're all going to see each other in 2022, but right now it's COVID, so masks and all that stuff. But we're still staying healthy and staying safe. Bye. I'll see you in 2022.
Well, that wraps up the 2021 Old Time Rangeman's Dinner. And thanks for watching, and thanks for coming. And I'll let Jason do his last bit here.
Well, if the creek don't rise and the pandemic doesn't come back with a vengeance and the whole world doesn't go plumb crazy, we'll see you back at the Palliser here in Calgary in July 2022. In the meantime, stay safe. So long.